welcome to another episode of the Spartan Spotlight podcast. It is the second episode in the last week. Obviously, a lot is happening around Michigan State football. There's a new head coach in the fold as the Spartans have hired Pat Fitzgerald. Couple that with the basketball program, currently 8-0, and kind of just running through everybody like a buzzsaw. Vibes couldn't be higher around Michigan State athletics right now. Big announcement coming Friday here for kind of reinforcement on kind of how good the vibes are and the resources that are going to be coming with the programs with the athletic department here in the near future. So yeah, great day, great time to be a Spartan, great time to cover the sport. Great time to just generally have discourse in the off season and kind of keep things bridged until the portal opens up until January, and then we go on from there in the calendar. But yeah, first things first, Michigan State has hired and by now introduced Pat Fitzgerald. I talked about him in the last episode of this podcast, which was the emergency episode pre-recorded for the news of Jonathan Smith's firing. The news after that about Fitzgerald's hiring kind of leaked out quicker than I thought it would. I knew that Fitzgerald was going to be the guy, but I had known for sure that nothing had been signed. And I also figured it would take until at least like Tuesday for it to start coming out is what I had thought. But that was not the case. The timeline was sped up. And Pat Fitzgerald is now the head coach of Michigan State football, the 27th head coach in the program's history. Like I had said in that past episode, we'll do the deep dive on Jonathan Smith and why that tenure didn't work, even though, to be honest, like a lot of the stuff still is puzzling to a great degree. And like on paper, a lot of the things that at Oregon State worked should have also worked at Michigan State. But again, like I kind of shared my sentiments in that episode, I don't think it would have worked no matter how much time would have gotten. So typically I'm against firing a coach so quickly. Typically I'm against people just throwing around the word fire without having like a significant upgrade specifically named while they're saying the word fire. But in this case, that's all discourse for another time. And it is all about Pat Fitzgerald here in this episode. And then after that, we will be talking about National Signing Day. Michigan State should have about 16 of their commits signed. Recording this here in the evening of signing day. I think there's a player or two that might be waiting until Friday, but we're looking at a really, really good class in terms of how it could have fallen apart, given that these kids all saw a coaching change to the coach that hired him, to somebody they don't really know a lot about, someone that didn't recruit them because he was at another program. It's not one of those situations where like Lane Kiffin goes from Ole Miss to LSU, and then a lot of LSU's commits were offered and recruited by Lane when he was at Ole Miss. It's not really like that. Like these kids don't really know who he is. In terms of like personal relationships and actual interactions and stuff. A lot of Midwest kids know the name. But again, like you even got to think about it. Like some of the kids that are out of region, for example, one player on the team reached out to me that didn't grow up anywhere in the Midwest, and he's from far away. And he's like, who's this new coach that they say that we're going to hire? And he's like, where did he come from? And like, do you think he can win? So like these kids really don't know a lot about him. And again, as we'll get into it, a couple years removed from football, and then also his last couple years weren't the greatest. So middle school is kind of when the last time some of these kids are familiar with him having success, if they knew him back then. So we are going to kind of be seeing a very interesting dynamic here of kids that are buying in quickly without really having a prior relationship, just based on the energy and the way the conversations have gone. And we'll talk about this when we kind of talk about the pros of the Pat Fitzgerald hire. And I think before we kind of even get into the specifics and start listing some of that stuff, I think it speaks for itself signing day wise. Like you have 16 kids that are going to sign by the end of today, and you have 19 kids committed overall. We'll see if like one or two of them end up flipping. They did already have a couple flips, but you're looking at a situation where these kids have spent Tuesday night and probably a lot of today, but definitely Tuesday night. Monday night and Tuesday night, and probably some of today, talking to Pat Fitzgerald over the phone, over FaceTime, and completely buying in. That is pretty much the only actual reporting I can do about the start of Pat Fitzgerald's tenure is him reaching out to those recruits. He's watching tape. He made a decision with the recruiting class in terms of trimming it down by one commit. Went after kind of going through and watching the tape, so that kind of shows how relentlessly he's attacked every part of this process already. And then he's brought in a couple of his own commits, 2 of them actually. So again, like he's dove fully headfirst into recruiting. That's been his only focus. Don't really have a lot to say about the staff he's going to be putting together because again, this is really the only thing that I can report on is the way that he's kind of hit the recruiting side of things hard. Probably after tomorrow is when a lot of that stuff might begin to be reported on in terms of his staff moves and stuff like that. But this was Fitzgerald's first and foremost priority thus far. Kind of speaking on diving into some of those pros and cons. Let's start with the negatives because we'll be spending much more time on the positive. So let's start with this. And I want to say off the bat that in terms of this hire, myself, Stephen Brooks, Corey Robinson, the 3 of us at the 24/7 Sports Michigan State site, Spartan Tailgate, we've been debating the merits of Pat Fitzgerald and his possible candidacy in college football. We've been discussing his potential fit at Michigan State. We've been doing this since like late, or I guess early October. I was going to say late September, but kind of whenever the UCLA game was, early/mid October, until even like right now. So this has been a never-ending discussion. And my standing in kind of all these discussions is I'm in wait and see mode. I really, really thought in the previous hiring of Jonathan Smith that it was going to be a copy and pastable blueprint of him succeeding in an underfunded place, coming to Michigan State, having more resources and being able to keep it going. I don't think the reason that he didn't succeed has anything to do with the Midwest ties thing. I know people will say, oh, if you want an explanation for why it didn't work, it was because you took a Pac-12 guy and you put him in the Big Ten. I disagree. I don't think it really has anything to do with that. That's not really kind of any merits to the process that he had, to the kind of the way he approached the portal, to the way that any of his daily tasks or his operations or his systems doesn't really have to do with where he grew up, and the way that if he kind of overvalued how some of the existing defensive players on his team, how good they were, that isn't because he grew up on the West Coast versus the East Coast. His inability to kind of get the most out of his offensive talent doesn't have to do with where he grew up. It's just a lot of stuff is puzzling in that regard. But my point is, before I went on that tangent, is that I thought that hire was going to be very successful. I'm very hesitant to have a incorrect take on a second straight hire here. I think that I can see the merits of why it can succeed, and I can see some of the downsides of why it might not. And I want to gather as much of a track record before I kind of put myself on one side or the other. But you'll probably figure out by the end of this podcast that I am very optimistic on it working out. I'm just not going to pound the table and say, if you're on the other side of that, then you're wrong and you're just being negative. But we're just going to walk through it. We're just going to walk through the logic of it. We're going to walk through the merits of the drawbacks and the advantages. So, like I said, starting with the negatives, 3 of Pat Fitzgerald's last 4 years at Northwestern were not necessarily glowing. The COVID season of 2020 actually was a Big Ten Coach of the Year season for him and a conference championship game appearance. The other 3 seasons surrounding that, 2019, 2021, 2022, not good at all. Now, people will say, okay, portal, NIL, like that's why. That doesn't really explain 2019 and 2021. That does explain 2022. But then the kind of logic there is, okay, well then truly, if you want to only blame him for the non-COVID, non-transfer portal seasons, it was bad season, good season, bad season in 2019, 2020, 2021. And that's fine for Northwestern. One bad season, one good season, one bad season is perfectly fine. You're in Evanston, like there's not a lot of resources. There's not a lot of ability to get kids into the school. I hear you. I'm not going to disagree strongly on that. But again, like that's his 3 of his most 4 recent full seasons. So you don't just kind of throw those aside and say anyone that wants to bring those up is an idiot. I think that's a legitimate concern. I think the other legitimate concern is, to what extent will he be now stepping up into these resources, and how will he be using them in a way that he couldn't at Northwestern? Meaning, is he going to just try to apply the same blueprint of like great value shopping, because money is tight, because academics are stringent, like kind of restrictions? Are you going to just continue to only recruit those kids and then work tirelessly to develop them, which is harder to do than just getting kids that are ready-made talents and then also developing them even more? Because the issues with Jonathan Smith's recruiting, now he landed some pieces I liked a ton in this class, like the Eddie Whitings of the world, Cade Coffins of the world. Like, there's some really nice pieces. These are not just pieces that, oh, you're going to eventually need them to hopefully develop 4 years down the road for them to have a chance at being good. Like, that's not really what this class is. But a large chunk of the talent that he's gotten in the last like 2 to 3 years, it kind of is along those lines. So I don't think it had to be, though. I think Smith was building the roster in a way that would have that's essentially him playing the game on like Heisman difficulty. And the worry that someone could have is that Pat Fitzgerald would do the same, because maybe he'll think, okay, Michigan State has had two good seasons here since the 2015 playoff appearance, the Holiday Bowl season and the Kenneth Walker Peach Bowl season. And because of that, I can't get involved in any recruiting battles against the Penn States of the world, the Michigans of the world, like even going to nationally. Like, you're worried that he's going to hamstring himself and just say, I've built a winner by recruiting people that nobody else wanted and developing them. And people will recall, like, sure, D'Antonio did that too, but D'Antonio won his fair share of battles for the Malik McDowells of the world too. So that's kind of the other thing is, like, obviously the results at the end, I don't know necessarily what to make of them, but they are something that you have to list in your list of cons. But the second thing is he going to lean way too far into his original, like, higher difficulty way of doing things, of just develop people that nobody else is looking at, say completely ignore the recruiting rankings, and I'm just going to get kids in here that are a fit and I'm going to develop them, even though to really, really win titles, you do have to have some guys that have NFL pedigree from the days you walk in. For every Grant Newsome and Rashawn Slaters and Peter Skronsky's that you can develop out of kids that aren't highly, highly ranked, you can probably develop 3 times as many in that same window if you're able to use Michigan State's financial resources and their brand to bring those guys along. So I think the proper way to do it is kind of molding the two styles. You don't want to just chase recruiting rankings. You essentially want to do it the way that Tom Izzo does it. Tom Izzo will go ahead and get that 4-star point guard that's ranked in the 50s or 60s, like a Carlos Medlock, and then say, he's my kind of guy. So I don't care if the recruiting rankings say there's 12 point guards better than him. I want the 13th best point guard because he's the best fit for my program. And then he's going to go get him. He's going to develop him. He's going to pour into him for years. And that's how he's going to do it. He'll go get the Cam Wards of the world, who are ranked just outside of the top, just right out of the 5-star range in the 30s, and say, I think he's actually a top 8 player in the country, even if 24/7 thinks he's the 38th best player in the country. So, like, you don't want to just go star chasing. Nobody should ever do that. That's not the way to do it. But you also can't just say, I'm only going to go get the 3 stars and I'm such a good developer. And he is. But that's just making his own job so much harder. So those are my 2 kind of negatives for why this might not work. The first one's not really a why. It's more of just like a, hey, this must be acknowledged. That was his record in the last 4 years in Northwestern. But the second one is like, what if he is going to come to this program that has much more resources, much more brand power, and just not actually leverage it in a great way? So that's kind of the way that I could see it not working. But I do think that the pathway to success is much more likely than it is for it to go that way. So shifting into the positives here, first, I want to start with the intangibles, actually. We talked about a lot of the tangible stuff, the operational stuff, the program strategic recruiting operation and stuff like that. But the intangibles. And this is kind of where I can bring up some of the recruiting testimonies from the kids that had talked to Pat Fitzgerald on Monday night. I wrote about one of those conversations, which was with Eddie Whiting's mom. Eddie Whiting is a tight end commit who had offers from like everybody, Florida, Michigan, Washington, everybody wanted him, and he never even remotely wavered in this process. People were circling back on him. His mom talked about the conversation that Fitzgerald had with Eddie, and she explained how Eddie was obviously like tense the last like 3-4 days because the change of his head coach being fired and then signing day being a few days away, and then Pat Fitzgerald, this guy that he doesn't really know, coming in and kind of replacing everything. And she explained that like kind of the second he got on the call, Pat Fitzgerald within minutes became very personal with Eddie and kind of sentimental and emotional, and talking about how there's nobody out there in college football that's more motivated to bring Michigan State football back to the level it deserves. And she kind of explained how like the second that he kind of started talking to Pat Fitzgerald, like he had the biggest smile on his face. He was fully bought in. These are things that you might think like people were thinking about these as possible positives for Fitzgerald before he was hired. Like the whole leader of men thing, the I want to run through the wall for him dynamic. Now this is kind of proof that it actually can work that way, because furthermore, Cade Kaufman, Michigan State's quarterback commit, the 4-star that a ton of schools are making a run at in the last few weeks. Like this was something that didn't actually kind of end up becoming public, but with Kaufman, every school that kind of is in that Michigan State tier in the Midwest, like they all were kind of checking in, and a lot of them were making contact, and schools were trying to get him to schedule an official visit and all that. And he was very, very shaken by kind of, or everybody really, about like how you're going to have a new offensive coordinator, you're going to have a new head coach, and quarterbacks even more so than anybody. Like the whole scheme dictates their level of success. So he was obviously like very apprehensive of like what is going to happen now, what is my future going to be like. To the second he hung up with Pat Fitzgerald, immediately said, "Yep, can't wait to sign on Wednesday. I'm all in with Coach Fitzgerald." So like these are things that you don't have to take my word for. Again, like I'm trying to be apprehensive, like, and not kind of just like be like all in over here right away on day 1, day 2, day 3. But like that's something that I cannot deny. That is not something I can downplay. That is just something that really, really can't be faked either. Like that, you getting immediate buy-in from kids after one phone call over FaceTime is just something that either you kind of have it or you kind of don't. You can't really go in there with a rah-rah speech, look into a phone, and just work magic for the most part. So I think with what you're going to see, I think most likely with the roster itself, a quarterback like Alessio Milivojevic, I think he's going to obviously look closely at the offensive coordinator hire. But assuming it's a good one, I think he's most likely going to end up staying at Michigan State, which I know is like a big piece that everyone's following. And a lot of that is because of the conversations Pat Fitzgerald has had with him early on. And that's just another sign here of how much people are buying in the second they look him in the eyes and talk to him. So I think I've kind of made my point with that element. That's just something that Jonathan Smith didn't really exude publicly. Now, I do want to say that his team never quit until the very end, and they were bought in and they really liked him from all accounts. So I can't sit there and be like, oh, like Jonathan Smith couldn't get any buy-in. Now here's this intense guy who's going to come in and suddenly everyone's going to be bought in. Like that's not true. Like Smith had buy-in, but there's a certain level of intensity that Pat Fitzgerald brings that's going to be motivating to just a whole nother level. And I think you're going to especially see that as you kind of get to see more and more time of the players being around him in practice and obviously games and stuff like that. But just these settings of phone calls and handshakes and walking around with him. You saw Alessio with Fitzgerald before the game or before the introductory press conference. Sorry. So like these interactions alone are getting kids to buy in. So imagine when they strap up the pads and they're working with this coach for the entirety of the spring. So that's one factor. That's just something that I think having a coach that you'll run through the wall for, that's something that you cannot really replicate. That's just something that I think either you have it or you don't. And Fitzgerald has that. Number 2 along this line of thinking, kind of zooming in a little too much, but also it's very important to Michigan State people. It is the understanding of the rivalry game with Michigan. Fitzgerald mentioned in the press conference kind of how, there's one game that's more important than the rest. Kind of left it there a bit. But Pat Fitzgerald understands the rivalry. He grew up in the Midwest, grew up in Chicago. He understands kind of the way that Michigan is perceived relative to Michigan State in this region. He does not like that. He is somebody that has viewed from, based on my understanding, I've talked to people that have known Fitzgerald for a while to get some background information, and they didn't want to speak for him and put quotes in his mouth. But one person that I talked to did go as far as to say that he views Michigan as public enemy number one, and he's going to do his best to absolutely beat them every chance he gets. And again, that is not quoting Pat Fitzgerald. That is not something you can attribute to Pat Fitzgerald. That is someone's perception who knows Pat Fitzgerald really well, explaining his perception to me. So that is something that Michigan State fans really care about. That is something that is a big deal in terms of the dynamic of the state, in terms of recruiting, in terms of the on-field wins. And those two things go hand in hand, obviously. So somebody that is going to come in here and motivate kids from the perspective of, hey, this game means a lot more, but not just the week of the game, but the entire offseason operation, the entire season. That is something that is going to be invaluable. That is something that you cannot put a price on. That is not something you can articulate via a resume. That is just something that you need if you coach at Michigan State, and Pat Fitzgerald has that. Now, the other thing that I want to mention about why I think this could really work is if he does the opposite of what my second con was. And that is, he does leverage Michigan State's platform, and he does leverage the brand power, and he does recruit at a higher level. Because if he can do that, so people say like, okay, let's say that Pat Fitzgerald gets back to his pre-2019 self, and he gets back to the developer that he was, and he wins games across the board against teams of similar talent. Like, that's a safe floor. Agreed. If he simply gets back to what he was at Northwestern for 14 of his 17 years, great floor. But let's talk about the ceiling. Some people are saying, even people that are praising the hire nationally, they're saying, when you hire Pat Fitzgerald, you're getting a great floor, but probably the ceiling is somebody that can't win like 10 games, 11 games. Well, hold on. Because if Fitzgerald was able to win 10 games at Northwestern a couple times, and you can't get anybody into that university, and you're not able to take transfers during the time that he was doing this, and you definitely weren't breaking the rules to pay kids during the time that he was having success, and now you're about to have a ton of financial support, especially with the announcement coming in the next few days, and you're about to have a facility that you can once again recruit heavily off of, as the Tom Izzo football building should now be complete. And you now have a logo and a brand that, sure, 2 good seasons in the last like 9 years, but historically is top 19 in wins, that has a 400,000 person alumni base, that has fans all over the country. You're telling me that he can't go ahead and land recruiting classes that are going to be much better than what he had at Northwestern, and henceforth land him many more wins than he was averaging over there? I don't know. To me, the math there doesn't really add up if you're putting a glass ceiling on his ability to succeed at Michigan State. Because let's say Fitzgerald comes in here, and again, he's not just going to go ahead and try to recruit like they do at Miami, or how they used to do at Texas A&M or Tennessee and all that stuff, and just try to stack stars. But let's say he starts coming in here and he picks off a couple 4 stars from Ohio. He takes 2 from Illinois, where obviously he coached forever, and he still has connections in the high school ranks, where he spent 3 years coaching over there, where his sons played and where his sons won national title or state titles. And let's say he takes 2 from the state of Michigan, just because they probably have a few less. Let's say 3, and then let's say he picks 1 from Pennsylvania, and then there's 1 from like North Carolina or something. And you're at like 7 4 stars. Maybe not the record that maybe Mel Tucker and Mark D'Antonio are tied for at 9 4 stars in the class, but let's say 7. And then let's say that he uses his great evaluation skills to bring in another 10 3 stars, of which 6 of them end up being hits. And you land a 17-man class that would be more talented than any Northwestern class on paper in a given year. And then after those 17 spots, he navigates the portal with the resources that Michigan State is about to give him in a way where he uses the same evaluation skills that have gotten him this far when he finds hidden gems in high school, to now find kids all over the group of 5, to find kids all over P5 that might not have had the playing time that they had. P4, sorry, RIP Pac-12. You can tell me that maybe it's not going to happen immediately. You can tell me that it might take 2 years. You can tell me that until the roster top to bottom has depth, you can't really put too much into it. I hear you. But I have a very hard time believing that the guy that was able to get NFL talent developed at Northwestern over a 4 or 5 year span with good financial commitment and this brand name backing him can't at the very, very least have more talented rosters at Michigan State than he had at Northwestern when he was winning 8 or 9 or 10 games. And if he does that, why can't he go ahead and then win the same amount of games or more with what he would have here if you're okay with acknowledging that he could get that kind of talent, if not better here? Because the only way that would happen is if he forgot how to coach, or if he suddenly hires much worse assistants here than he had in the prime of his Northwestern run, which should not happen given the resources that J-Bat has given him. So I don't really understand that there's a glass ceiling on Fitzgerald. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that he's going to be a success. I'm not going to sit here and say it's an A+ hire. Like I said, I'm in wait and see mode. I need to see who he hires. I need to see how he's going to recruit. But I'm saying if you're telling me he's going to recruit the way that you would hope or project that he would now that he's at Michigan State, then I reject the notion that there is a glass ceiling on what Fitzgerald can do here. Because there's no reason that he can't come in here and have more talent than he had at Northwestern. There's no reason that he's not going to be able to retain talent once he gets it when you're at Michigan State. There's less barriers to get talented players into Michigan State than there were at Northwestern. And there's more funding to attract kids to Michigan State that A, might not have been able to get into Northwestern, and B, might have been getting payoffs to go to other schools where they were getting that money. So there's nothing on paper that logically would tell me that if he does what he's supposed to do with his hires, if he recruits the way that you would hope that he would at Michigan State, if those boxes are checked, you couple that with his drive and his passion to prove people wrong that might have counted him out, and you couple that with just how much he's loving the second chance to be back in coaching, and you combine all those factors, I have a hard time seeing why anybody can sit there and assess this hire as, oh, it's good enough for Michigan State, or it's a safe floor, but I don't know what the ceiling is with Pat Fitzgerald. I'm not putting a ceiling on this hire. Again, I'm not sitting here and promising success. I'm not sitting here and saying great hire, but I'm rejecting the notion that there's a glass ceiling. So that's kind of my assessment of it. We'll dive into the staff hires that kind of are going to be coming in the next days, weeks, months. Then we'll really assess kind of how good of a staff he put together, how I think that might set him up for success or not. We'll go ahead and talk a lot more about that as we get more information. I don't think it's crazy to expect that maybe a coach or two from his Michigan State, from the last year's Michigan State staff could maybe stick. I don't have any firm reporting on that or anything, but I can say that somebody like maybe Courtney Hawkins is somebody that I believe that Pat Fitzgerald is very closely considering as potentially sticking on the staff. I think that would be a good move. If that were to happen, then I think it would be obvious to everybody why that's the case. You don't accidentally luck into remaining or being hired by 3 straight head coaches in the same spot. Obviously the Spartan alum would be good for the culture and all that. We'll talk more about that if that becomes official. Probably premature to be even spending the last 25 to 30 seconds talking about it, but we'll see if that ends up coming to fruition. We'll see if anybody else is kept on the staff. But I think at the end of the day, that whole topic and that whole can of worms of staffing and everything, that would be more wise to leave until we actually have real stuff to report on. The last thing I wanted to touch on here, National Signing Day. So Michigan State has gone ahead and signed, I want to say about 16 kids today. We'll just kind of run through them in order, kind of with how they are ranked on the 24/7 Sports signing day page. Michigan State has signed KJ DeRiso. He is a cornerback from Fayetteville, Georgia. They have signed Hudson Altman, a defensive lineman from Delaware, Ohio. Elijah Caldwell-Hardy, a safety from Jacksonville, Florida. Adam Shaw, a linebacker from Hillsdale, New Jersey. He is a Spartan legacy. TJ Umenyiora from Roswell, Georgia. His dad is Osi Umenyiora, who played for the New York Giants as a pass rusher for a long time. They've signed wide receiver Zachary Washington from Wheaton, Illinois. He's a wide receiver that even the Wisconsin Badgers were trying to flip as recently as the last couple days. Corey House, an edge rusher from Memphis, Tennessee. He is a kind of rush end candidate if the next scheme kind of has something like that. Eddie Whiting, the tight end, whose mom Jen gave the insight that we talked about earlier here. He is from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Again, great prospect, big fan of him. Joey Caudill, he is from Mansfield, Ohio. He's another tight end. He's somebody that I really, really liked early on when he committed. I didn't talk about him enough as much as I should have the last few months. He plays quarterback for his high school team exclusively. This is an evaluation by tight ends coach Brian Wozniak of how he would project a tight end. And I think this is very savvy. I think this is a great find. When Penn State landed Tyler Warren a few years ago, this is exactly the type of prospect he was, exclusively at quarterback. And their tight ends coach said, hey, if he became a tight end and we brought him here and we put him in the weight room, I think he can be an absolute star. And Michigan State is now hoping that Joey Caudill will be the same exact kind of find for him. I can see it. I'm not going to call him TJ Warren, but not TJ Warren. He played on the Phoenix Suns during the bubble. Bubble Warren, as people remember. Braden Thomas, he is a safety from Lakewood, Ohio. Jack Ziarko from Canton, Ohio, home of the NFL Hall of Fame. He is the flip that Michigan State executed earlier this morning. He's a top 40 composite player out of the state of Ohio. So there's a little bit of D'Antonio flair there. He flipped from Miami of Ohio. Eli Bickle, he is the North Branch, Michigan offensive tackle. Rayshawn Elmore, the Indian Trail, North Carolina receiver. He is somebody whose tape I loved a lot when Michigan State hosted him in June. I do not understand why he doesn't have more offers. Literally have no idea what to tell you guys on that. I watched it again. I'm like not sure at all why he doesn't have at least every other offer from the Michigan State tier of schools in the Power Four. He should have all the Michigan States, the Wake Forest, the Illinois, all those offers should be his way. I'm not really sure why he's not ranked higher. I think he's a great player. Jonathan Granby, that's a flip that Michigan State also got out of Roswell, Georgia. He is a flip from Georgia Southern. And then at this point right now, the profiles for Cade Kaufman and Tristan Comer don't show their signs. So sorry, that's why this is out of order. But touching on these two guys here at the end, Kaufman, obviously the 4-star quarterback from the Grand Rapids area on the composite. Every single time I've seen him in person, which is like 5 times in the last like 12 or 13 months, every single time he looks better than he did the most recent time. And I think great job by Pat Fitzgerald to immediately get him on the phone and to get him to stick in this class. I think he's a kid that can be the future of this program. And he's somebody that if Michigan State can get him in here, get him to continue processing the game he's really good at processing. You get him, feed him a lot of information. You get him to continue to keep throwing the ball at the same level that he's throwing it at now. And I think he's going to be a great player. Get some more mass on him. Runs that pro style offense with the great program out there in East Kentwood with Ty Spencer. I think he's somebody that Michigan State fans are going to look back on and say, hey, in those 2 or 3 days when Pat Fitzgerald came in here and nobody really knew what was going to happen, him getting Cade Kaufman to stick in this class has really paid dividends all these years down the line. And then Tristan Comer also signed today. He is from Freeland, Michigan. Good size, good offensive tackle there. He's somebody that we like a lot at 24/7 Sports. Potential, new to the position, former tight end. Alan True, our Midwest director of recruiting, loves him a ton. And Jeremiah Favorite will be signing on Friday, but still in this early window. So that would leave Colin Campbell, the 4-star offensive tackle from Gilbert, Arizona, who is expected to sign in February, and Samson Gash, who is also expected to sign in February. So those two might be wavering a bit. Obviously, you can't really sit there and be like, oh, they're 1,000% committed. But the fact that instead of them flipping to the other options they have, which for Samson Gash includes Alabama, and Alan True was able to verify that the last time that he heard that was a committable offer, because I know a lot of the assumption would be that it's not a committable offer, and that's why he's sitting around and not jumping on it. But so yeah, those two guys choosing to simply delay things instead of flipping immediately and signing elsewhere this week is as good of a scenario as it could be in those two cases. So big by Michigan State to get this entire class essentially intact. Michigan State did lose Jordan Van to Louisville, and they did lose F.A. Ciale, who flipped to Utah. So Ciale was all the way from Seattle. I can see how that would kind of happen. You weren't going to keep everybody, but they kept 17 guys and added 2 more today. So 19 commits, and that's assuming that the 2 guys I mentioned that have delayed to February end up signing. I think Pat Fitzgerald will be working very hard on them. I think that right now I would bet on them to stay as opposed to flip, but not with any high confidence or anything of certainty. So I think all in all, a great signing day for Michigan State with where this class could have gone otherwise. I think Pat Fitzgerald has done as much as he possibly could in his first couple days in terms of a recruiting standpoint. I know the staff was working on a couple flips that didn't end up coming to fruition just because they kind of ran out of time. Maybe guys in the portal to keep in mind in the next year or 2, 3, whatever. But they made attempts to even go bigger than this. They just ran out of time there. So we'll kind of see what happens in the next several days. We'll kind of see what happens for if they're going to take anybody in February signing day. But that'll all come after they have a full month to look at the portal, which will open the first week of January, which is the soonest that kids can enter. We'll talk about the portal. We'll talk about the needs. We'll talk about all that as it gets closer. We saw that Nick Marsh is in there. No surprise there whatsoever. I think by the middle of the season, it was pretty much a guarantee that he was going to be leaving. I would expect Aiden Childs to enter the portal. I don't have intel on that, but I know that Pat Fitzgerald has been working really hard to try to retain Alessio. So it seems like between the amount of eligibility left of 3 years versus 1 for Childs, the way that Alessio kind of finished the season, I think the writing is a little bit on the walls of which way that's going to trend. But not necessarily saying that's reporting or anything, but I would anticipate Childs entering the portal for sure. Or I would anticipate it for sure, but I'm not saying it is happening for sure. That is my anticipation with certainty. Okay, that's very poorly worded. I think you guys get the sentiment there. I think that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to touch on here. To get more information on the actual recruits, who I know some of them I stopped and gave notes on, but others who I actually have more to say on than even some of the guys I talked about. Those will all be available in the coming days when we put out the content that we have planned. We're going to be putting out signing day superlatives. Stephen Brooks is going to publish that, where we all kind of come together and give him our answers for a lot of these questions. I think it's most likely to play early on offense, most likely to play early on defense, and most likely most important piece in the class. And I think most underrated. So watch out for that article. That's one of my favorite ones to help put together every year. And then I will be putting out my yearly article of 1-sentence scouting reports. So that is like how you basically need to know, or how you need to think of each kid, just in like 1 sentence off the top of your head of like what to make of them and what kind of player they are. So things of that nature. So that'll help you guys kind of put some notes to memory when it comes to some of these kids. And then we'll kind of go from there. So appreciate everybody tuning in for another episode of the Spartan Spotlight podcast. I don't know necessarily when the next one will be. I think maybe after the entire staff is full, ideally probably towards the end of the month, because then we can also bridge it towards the transfer portal needs and their strategy and what they're going to kind of try to do there. That'll probably be a good 2 birds, 1 stone type of thing. Plus, I think hopefully by then, pretty much most of the staff should be hired. So that's kind of the next thing that I have planned here for this channel, for this show, is let's aim for a late December transfer portal primer / coaching staff review. But myself and my colleagues at SpartanTailgate.com, we will continue to post hourly by kind of, or for like each of the updates that we'll be able to get on the impending staff moves, the sort of kind of rumors and the buzz on who might be joining Pat Fitzgerald and his staff in East Lansing. I know the interest has been high. I've even had people reach out to me saying, can you put in a good word for Fitzgerald to kind of interview and things of that nature. I'm staying out of all that, but my point is like people are going ahead and they're so interested that they're kind of reaching out even to me just to kind of get a foot in the door. But yeah, we'll see what he kind of does there. I think it'll be interesting. I think he'll be empowered. he's going to have to make high-level decisions and hire a great staff because even if we know that defense is going to be good under Pat Fitzgerald, it's been a while since offenses have been good in Michigan State outside of 2021. And the last offensive coordinator that they just hired here with Brian Lindgren, he had great statistics out in Oregon State with DJU at quarterback, and still somehow it didn't work out here. So everyone's a little scarred and a little puzzled with kind of the lack of success here from OC. So that'll be the big hire. We'll keep our eye on that and everything else that Fitzgerald must work on in the coming days. So again, appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Spartan Spotlight.